Welcome to Executive Session from Directors and Boards.
A director that's maybe been through 5 downturns may see risk faster than everyone else, and that's useful. But a director who assumes that every downturn will behave like the last one may miss what's actually different this time.
Hello and welcome to Executive Session, the official podcast of Directors and Boards. I'm your host, Bill Hayes, Editor-in-Chief of Directors and Boards. We just heard from Liat Ben-Zur, Director of Compass Group, Talkspace and Splashtop Inc. on leadership in the age of AI. In this episode of Executive Session, we'll also explore brand as a board-level concern with Verdell Walker and quarterly disclosures with Charles Elson. Brand is often viewed as a marketing responsibility, but for boards, it may be one of the company's most important strategic assets and one of its most significant sources of risk. In an era when customer trust can be damaged overnight and reputational crises can unfold in real time, directors need to understand not only how a brand creates value, but also how it can erode long before the warning signs appear in financial results. So what does effective board oversight of brand actually look like? And what questions should directors be asking before a crisis forces their attention? In this segment with Verdell Walker, Director of Scholastic, we'll explore the board's role in protecting, monitoring, and strengthening one of the most valuable assets any organization possesses. Verdell, many boards view brand primarily as a marketing issue rather than a governance issue. What are directors missing when they fail to treat brand as a strategic asset and an enterprise risk?
Yeah, I think the core mistake is thinking about brand as a line item expense rather than as an asset. Your brand is a promise. It's the promise you're constantly making to your customers, your employees, your partners, to all stakeholders of importance. And it's built on trust that you are who you say you are. And when boards treat brand as just a marketing line item, they lose sight of what that promise actually cost to break in terms of customer loyalty, talent retention, pricing power, and long-term enterprise value. Brand drift doesn't show up on a balance sheet until it's already a serious problem. And that's why it belongs in the boardroom.
In your experience, what are the earliest signs that a company's brand positioning or customer trust may be deteriorating before it shows up in financial performance?
The canary in the coal mine is almost never in the quarterly brand tracker. It's the qualitative signals that don't have a dashboard, Bill. Employee sentiment tends to shift before customer sentiment does. If your people are losing faith in what the company stands for, that will eventually reach the outside world. I think you also see it in a few other places. You can see your earned media tone changing, your customer success data is picking up brand-related friction, talent pipelines quietly weakening, partners and licensees get more cautious, and online the social conversation can shift and register, less enthusiasm, more skepticism. Here's a big one too, product reviews on e-commerce sites and in online discussion forums like Reddit, which is the true town hall of the internet, if you ask me. By the time it shows up in revenue, you've usually missed several earlier warning signals.
When a brand crisis unfolds at social media speed, the instinct is often to hand it entirely to management and communications teams. How should the board's role differ from management's role in those moments? And what does good governance look like when the trust is eroding in real time?
Yeah, so I want to be clear. Management owns the response, full stop. The board's job is not to step in and start making comms decisions. Noses in and fingers out. That's what we do. Our role is really to ensure that management has the framework, the authority, the resources, and the muscle memory to respond effectively before a crisis ever takes place. And that means that directors should be asking the right questions in advance. Do we have a crisis playbook? Has it been tested? Who has decision-making authority when things are moving fast? What is the sequence of events and escalation thresholds as things are happening? So in the heat of the moment, the board's job is really oversight and support, making sure that the management team isn't operating without adequate resources or cover.
What does meaningful board-level brand oversight actually look like in practice, and how do you know when it's missing?
It starts with asking the right questions. Like, that's what a good board director does, I think, is asking the right questions at the right cadence. We are not supposed to be in the weeds. We do not need to know how individual campaigns are performing. We should be asking what the conversation around our brand is like at the employee, customers, and in some cases, depending on the industry, Bill, regulatory and government level as well. It's really about having a forward-looking view for what risk and opportunities that management sees that we can be proactive about. I think another good question that directors should ask is, what does our brand permission set allow us to do next? And what would put that at risk? I also recommend having at least one director with genuine brand literacy, because that's an asset as well, because then the conversation will have a real foundation.
That was Verdell Walker. Next up, we will speak with Liat Ben-Zur. Boards spend a great deal of time discussing strategy, risk, and oversight, yet one of the biggest threats to effective decision-making often goes unexamined: the biases directors bring into the boardroom. While bias is usually viewed as something to eliminate, some experts argue that certain biases can actually enhance judgment when properly understood and managed. As boards grapple with AI, cybersecurity, disruption, and other complex challenges, the question is no longer whether bias exists, but how it influences the decisions directors make. In this segment with Liat Ben-Zur, director of Compass Group, Talkspace, and Splashtop Incorporated, and author of The Bias Advantage: How Unconventional Leaders Gain Power in an AI-Driven World, we'll explore how boards can recognize hidden blind spots, leverage experience without becoming trapped by it, and improve the quality of their decision-making in an increasingly uncertain world. Liat, in your book, The Bias Advantage: How Unconventional Leaders Gain Power in an AI-Driven World, you argue that bias can actually become an advantage rather than simply a flaw to eliminate. In the boardroom, how can directors recognize when bias is distorting decision-making versus when it may actually reflect useful experience or pattern recognition?
Yeah, bias and pattern recognition often come from the same place, which is experience. And I'm not arguing that bias is good. I'm saying that experience shapes what we notice. So a director that's maybe been through 5 downturns may see risk faster than everyone else. And that's useful. But a director who assumes that every downturn will behave like the last one may miss what's actually different this time. And that can be dangerous. So your lived experience can become an early warning system. If you've been excluded or unwelcomed in certain rooms, you learn to hear the unsaid things. You learn to listen and to notice who's missing. You catch the assumptions that were unspoken, but which may actually have very big downstream implications for certain cohorts of people. And that matters enormously in the age of AI. It actually becomes a superpower for AI leadership, because as everybody knows, I think AI could sound very confident while being completely wrong. And it can give you pretty polished answers that are built on biased data or missing context. The machine doesn't always know what's been left out, and it's encoding a lot of the old patterns and then presenting them as neutral outputs. The risk with all of this is that AI, it makes bias stop sounding like opinion and start sounding like objective conclusions.
Yeah.
And so you really want people in the boardroom who ask, what's missing in the data? What assumptions are hiding inside these recommendations? Who gets harmed if we're wrong? I think those types of questions can protect the company. And what I've observed is that directors who personally experience bias in their career or their lives, they tend to be more likely to ask and look for those things that are hidden inside systems. And so I think the advantage is not bias. The advantage is bias detection.
Boards are increasingly being asked to oversee AI, cyber risk, and major transformations while making decisions with incomplete information. What are the most dangerous cognitive biases directors should watch for during high-pressure decisions, and what practical steps can boards take to counteract them?
The biggest danger I see is what I call certainty moving faster than learning. So leadership boards, leadership teams and boards, we've all been trained on how to sound calm, during big disruptions, present a sense of control, if you will, whether it's a cyber incident that unfolds in real time or a massive AI investment that's not paying off, or for a competitor that's changing the market overnight. Like, the board wants to see a plan and management wants to project a sense of control.
Yeah.
But I think that overconfidence can become dangerous when facts are moving so fast like they do in the age of AI. And so one thing to pay attention to on boards is consensus bias, especially under time pressure. A deal needs to close by Friday. There's a breach that needs a public statement by Monday. Directors that maybe would normally push back in your regular quarterly review sessions, you're noticing that they suddenly are nodding approvals through the most consequential decisions of the year, just because there's this pressure, this time pressure. The calendar is making dissent feel almost rude. And so the most dangerous trap at these high pressure moments is this rush for comfort, because we're craving safety. We quickly align with the loudest or most confident voice in the room. And in those pressure moments, speed feels like strategy.
Yeah.
But I think consensus bias is dangerous. You got to just break the spell of agreement. That's the only way you're going to see like the potential cliffs. The second bias I observe a lot is what I call authority dressed up as objectivity. This might be like the AI dashboard or the McKinsey deck or the cyber report from the firm with some big logo. It's almost like once a number has been laundered through enough credentials, the directors stop asking how it was made. Like, imagine a courtroom where nobody examines the expert witness, right? And then the third bias I think about is distance bias, because as board members, we're seeing the world through these board materials, and they're very polished decks, and you end up seeing a bunch of like aggregated metrics, very clean summaries. But again, like AI, cyber, these transformation risks, they show up in very messy places. Customer complaints, employee workarounds, some edge case or adoption failure, like operational friction somewhere. And it can be dangerous when boards get too far away from where these risks are showing up. And don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that boards need to become a technical team or get into the pants of leadership. That's not the job. But boards need to become much better at asking the questions that keep technology, strategy, and accountability tied together. And they need people in the room with that contextual judgment, if you will. I think AI really raises the premium on human judgment because everything is moving and changing so fast. So the more powerful these machines become, the more disciplined the humans around the table have to become.
Many boards pride themselves on having experienced directors with strong industry backgrounds. But how can deep expertise itself become a source of blind spots or what you call uniqueness bias, particularly when industries are being disrupted?
Well, expertise is incredibly valuable. I mean, obviously, we want experienced people in the boardroom. We want board members who've seen up and down cycles, crises, bad deals, failed transformations, overhyped technologies. But I think that sometimes expertise also has a shadow side, because the longer you've been successful with one business model, the easier it is to believe that this model is more permanent maybe than it really is. And we've seen that many times in retail. For years, people said, our customer wants the store experience. Some did, but that belief became a reason to underinvest in digital until the customers have moved on. We saw it in media. People said, our audience will always value the bundle. And then, audiences unbundled themselves. We saw it in education and healthcare and finance and software. Like every industry has this version of we are different.
Yeah.
And I do think, there is some truth to that, by the way, like regulation matters, customer trust matters, business models can be unique, but we are different can be a very elegant way of saying we do not want to re-question what made us successful. And that's what I mean by uniqueness bias. Uniqueness bias is when a company mistakes its constraints for immunity. And I think expertise and experience, they're very important, but they're most powerful when they stay curious. And in a disrupted market, if you hear that would never happen here, to me, that's often kind of the first warning sign to ask more questions.
That was Liat Ben-Zur. Next up, we will speak with Charles Elson. Few ideas in corporate governance have generated as much debate as the proposal to reduce or eliminate quarterly reporting requirements. Supporters argue that less frequent reporting would encourage long-term thinking and reduce pressure to manage earnings. Critics counter that quarterly reporting is one of the most important tools investors and boards have for maintaining accountability, transparency, and trust. As directors consider what role disclosure should play in modern governance, an important question emerges. Is quarterly reporting really the cause of short-termism, or is the issue something deeper within corporate culture and board oversight? In this segment with Charles Elson, Executive Editor at Large of Directors and Boards, we'll examine what boards, investors, and companies stand to gain or lose if the quarterly reporting model changes. Charles, if quarterly reporting requirements were reduced or eliminated, what would boards lose in terms of oversight, accountability, and investor trust? And would any meaningful governance benefits actually be gained?
No, I don't think so. Honestly, even if the requirement from the SEC is implemented and we go to 6-month periods, I don't think investors will allow it. I think they're going to continue to demand quarterly reporting. And the reason is pretty simple. Companies are judged on their quarters by their boards. The accounting profession reports numbers quarterly. Every 3 months, you get a snapshot into how the company's doing. These reports quarterly are critical for boards in evaluating management. And if you were to suddenly say it's every 6 months, boards will still get the information quarterly. They have to. The idea is, well, if it's 6-month reporting and the public gets it only every 6 months, then obviously you won't have earnings management issues, the pressure for quote unquote quarterly earnings increases, things like that. I don't believe that's true at all. I think that, frankly, if you set it to 6 months, you'll be, the same incentive to manage the numbers for the 6 months will be there that you had for the quarter. And I don't think it solves the problem. It's important for boards because, frankly, boards obviously need quarterly reporting. That's how you judge managerial performance from the board level. And if the board gets that information, I think so should the investors, and let them understand and look at the numbers too. Obviously, you can't judge a company on a quarter, but a quarter's results are relevant and they are material, and they may show a trend, they may not. That's for the board to decide. But certainly, your public investors need that as well. And frankly, if you didn't and you kept silent for 6 months, ultimately you're going to lead to a lot of speculation in the stock price. Probably some insider trading as well from people who really know what's going on over those 6 months. And the result is a less efficient market and no impact whatsoever on quarterly earnings or quarterly reporting or management of quarterly numbers. And in the end, I think everyone loses. It's just a bad idea, sadly.
Critics of quarterly reporting argue it fuels short-termism and earnings management. Is that truly a disclosure problem, or is it ultimately a board and management culture problem?
I think it's probably more of a oversight problem vis-a-vis the board and management. I mean, a board who allows management to manage the numbers or massage the numbers is really not doing its job. I mean, the key is honesty and transparency. And when you create a culture where there's an incentive to management to manage numbers, to quote unquote get that quick pop, that's a bad culture in the end. And frankly, this whole short-term, long-term thing is a little nonsensical in the sense that every stock price has a long-term value built into it. The idea of a value, when you come up with a price, is the future earnings of the company. And you can manipulate a quarter or two, but ultimately it always comes out in the wash. In the end, people figure it out. Now the question is, okay, let's say we get rid of quarterly reporting and do it every 6 months to quote keep long-term perspectives in place. Well, why not then say let's do it once a year? Can you really judge a company every 6 months? Maybe you do it every 5 years. That's long term. Maybe have the board meet once every 5 years and look at what to do and report every 5 years. Of course, that's ridiculous. That will never happen. But I think that is the nonsensical nature of this. Oh, if we just extend the time frame, we'll create more long term thinking. I don't think it makes a lot of sense. That's long term thinking is up to the board and its stewardship of management and its oversight of management that really gets you to a long-term perspective. As I said, you can't judge anything on a quarter, but a quarter does tell you something as a director. You can begin to see trends in quarters, and you have to value it as such. How the public deals with those numbers is really the public itself, the analysts themselves. The short-termism, quote unquote, really has to do more, with I guess just management managing to analysts and analysts viewing it on the short. But look, the market isn't made up of analysts. It over the long period, the market does a pretty good job of evaluating performance and value. And I think it's up to the board to insist to management that you have to manage to the long term, and you may take your knocks in a quarter. That happens. But obviously, if you make the case to your board and to the public, if you will, your shareholders, that you may have had a bad quarter, but long term you're trying to create long term value, and they believe you, then ultimately it works itself out. And I think that's always the way you can look at it. At least that's how I've looked at it as a director. A bad quarter is just that, a bad quarter. If you have two bad quarters and you have no decent explanation, then the bad quarter becomes a trend, and a trend becomes a real problem. That's the issue.
Boards themselves evaluate management and monitor performance on a quarterly cadence. If directors rely on quarterly financial visibility to fulfill their fiduciary duties, why shouldn't shareholders expect the same level of transparency?
Absolutely. And you got to remember the boards are elected by the shareholders. They're the shareholders' representatives, fiduciaries. And to say to someone, oh, I'm not going to tell you what's really going on because it may upset you. It's that how in the world can you run an efficient market that way? The owners have the right and expectation to understand the company's performance, as do their elected representatives. Transparency is critical to this whole thing. And if you eliminate that transparency and keep people guessing for 6 months, that leads to speculation and in swings in the stock price that are probably not helpful to the company itself. And it frankly leads to a lot of insider trading, if you think about it, because someone in the inside of that company knows, and at some point it's going to get out, and they may trade on it. A 6 month silence period doesn't make a lot of sense. Hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. That's not a way to run a business in a public market.
Okay, everybody. Well, thank you so much to Charles Elson, Liat Ben-Zur, and Verdell Walker. And thank you for joining us for this episode of Executive Session. Please look out for our next episode. And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to share it with your friends and colleagues and let them know they can look for it on the Directors and Boards website. Also, make sure to check out directorsandboards.com, where you can get all the articles from our magazine, as well as so much more. You might also be interested in our weekly newsletter, which you can subscribe to at our website. And when you visit the site, make sure to check out all of our back episodes of Executive Session, which are also available wherever you get podcasts. And for the videocast version of the show, you can check out the new Directors and Boards YouTube channel. One last thing, the agenda for the Character of the Corporation 2026, being held November 12th in New York City, is available at the Directors and Boards website. Check it out today and get more details about the event. So once again, I'm your host, Bill Hayes, and until next time, consider this executive session closed.